If you're thinking about as an investor, the key thing to think about is that you are paying a premium to be in this zone. And so is that premium worth paying for? Hello and welcome to another episode of Help Me Buy Property Podcast. And today I have with me again, Cheryl Leong, my co-host. Hello, Cheryl. How are you today?
Hey, Moss. I'm fantastic. How's it going? What are we talking about today?
We are going to talk about investing and developing in school zones. It's a very unique topic. And not a lot of people talk about school zones. It's almost like one of those taboo topics where buyer's agents talks a lot about the school zones, but you don't see general investors talk about school zones or even think about school zones. A lot of owner-occupier would focus on school zones a lot more. But when you're talking about investment properties, people put a blind eye to it. And so I think it's important to talk a bit about, school zones and the investing and the developing side of things. And what does that really mean?
Yeah, I'm interested to hear. And it is something, you see in re.com and domain when an agent is advertising.
Yes.
If the property is in this particular school zone, which is in, quite a well-known school or whichever. So what I'm interested to find out, and let's talk about sort of the 101 stuff, and then is it, is it the same consideration with developing in school zone is it the same as investing in school zone areas? So we'll come to that, but let's start off, what do we mean by school zone or school catchments? What does that mean? What does that term mean?
Yes. And look, when you talk about the school zones, you're talking about premium public schools in a particular geographical location of a local government area or particular council. Okay. And so what tends to happen is for people who wants their kids to go in that premium school, the school would usually require a proof of residency. And so they would say, are you living in that particular council? They'll ask for a council rate or a utility bill or a driver's license, etc. Or even like a minimum lease of 12 months, to identify and establish that you are a resident of that council, and then offer a free spot in that premium school for your kids. And so naturally, it's an attraction for owner-occupier, and they would always consider buying in these school zones. A lot of investors don't tend to naturally think about school zones or don't even bother checking school zones of where their properties are located. So the question becomes, why would owners focus on acquiring properties in school catchments, right? And so if I share a story here, a great friend of mine, naturally he's thinking, and he has lived in a school zone for yonks and yonks, and this is Caulfield, school zone. And so his thinking was predominantly very simple. He said, look, if I send my kids to private school, they're going to cost somewhere between 12K to 30K. That's where they start off. And, and so he had 3 kids. And so multiply, that, annual yearly spend of say 30K per child. You are looking at almost $250,000 to $300,000 of investing, right? And so naturally his instinct was that, well, if I can buy in a school zone that offers the same educational opportunity to my kids, then I don't need to spend that sort of money on the private education. And that was driving him to a school zone mentality. Of course, he paid a premium to enter into that particular suburb because he wanted his kids to go to that, premium public school. And that's how emotionally invested these owner-occupiers are when they are basically buying in school zones.
So what are in terms of the values then, right? How does this impact the values of the properties in those areas?
Oh, it's crazy. It's crazy. And so properties that are in the school zones versus outside the school zones, the property prices can vary between $100,000 to almost like $400,000 or $500,000 to that extent. Okay. And the funny thing is that the councils don't dictate what the school zone looks like. The school decides what a school zone looks like, right? Or because they are government schools. or the Department of Human Services or Education, they would be the one deciding probably Department of Education and Training would be deciding what the school zone would look like, depending on, how many people are living in a particular council. And so there is a risk that your property could be in and out of the school zone, depending on how they're changing the school zones. Now, there are schools that have changed school zones pretty much every year because of the demand and the new schools that they're building surrounding, to cater for that demand. And so the prices can drop significantly, if your house goes outside of the school zone. And it has happened to one of my friends who bought a property just at the border of a particular school zone. And this is in Melbourne, Point Cook and Alamanda school zone. And I kept telling him, look, if you're thinking about buying in a school zone, buy right in the heart, be like one street away from the school.
So you're not going to get zoned out of it. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And so naturally, as you move closer to the boundaries, the property prices even starts going lower and lower. Okay, because everyone knows about this. And so he was one of those unlucky ones where the zone changed and all of a sudden his property was outside the catchment zone.
Yeah.
And overnight, the property price dropped by almost $80,000.
Yeah, right. Ouch.
Yes. And so,
but his kids still went to the school, I'm assuming, because they're already enrolled.
Look, yes and no. So the school has a right, and they do the audits as well. And so while you might enter into a property, or people do that, they'll get a rental property, live there for 1 year. I see a lot of Chinese investors doing that. They'll rent a property, not live there, just because their kids want to go there, and then basically let the property go, or the rental property go. It's a very common thing, but schools know that. The premium schools know that. And so what they'll do is they'll do random audits of people. They'll rock up to your house, knock the door, and check that this is the person living in the property. And so while you can enter, they can actually kick you out pretty quickly as well if they realize that you're not a local resident of that particular council, and so your school catchment is different.
Ooh, that's a little bit cheeky. Yeah, well, cheeky if you're not living in the area. So in terms of then, like the property, we're talking about property prices. What's actually driving it? Is it the zone, or is it the actual people that are moving into the area? And is it generally, is there some sort of affluence in people moving in there, or is it just the demand in general?
And so there is a particular study, and this is a typical chicken and egg story, right? What drives what? Is the price dictating the better school, or is it the affluency of the people moving into that suburb that is dictating a better quality of school? Because people are more focused on their kids' education, right? And there has been studies done in this sort of cohort where, if you look at the data basically indicates that the kids who have been to these selective schools or catchment schools, they perform better in life. They are more disciplined. And this is more to do with the neighborhoods and the parents taking more active role in kids' decision-making, in kids' life, in grooming, how the kids' future is going to look like. Okay, if you take a step back, not all selective schools are great, right? Because, there would be private schools, where there is high affluence people living in those areas, but the area's demographics might not be that great, right? And so it's important to understand, what drives what. I have a core belief that the administration of the school and how the school is run basically drives its reputation at the start. And as they mature, they start attracting the cream, and that helps them amplify their reputation. Okay, so the starting point is always the administration and how the school is run. The reason I say this is because I'll give an example of Alamanda School Zone in Melbourne, because I've seen that very closely. That school never had a top reputation always, when it first started. But one of the principals that moved out and moved into the Alamanda School Zone was a principal from a highly affluent school. And so you could see that as soon as he was put in there, people started talking about it. He started, getting parents more involved in the decision-making, in the grooming of the kids. And all of a sudden, you would see that, the school's reputation started going up. Its ranking started coming up. And, people just flocked and, gave the reputation a much bigger boost. And the more the parents are involved in the kids' journey, they would set kids on tuitions and music lessons and basketball lessons, and they are doing 4 different activities. That's basically doing a lot more outside the school as well, right? So not everyone can afford it, right? You need to be in that affluence bracket for you to provide that atmosphere to your kids, and so naturally that gets reflected in the school's reputation as well.
Yeah. So does it mean, are you seeing, in terms of, we talked about this at the start, developing in a school zone area, are they the same sort of considerations as investing in the school zone area?
Look, development is an interesting one when you talk about school zones. Okay, my personal, experience has been that developing in a school zone is quite difficult. The reason being is that majority of these school zones are set up in areas which do not support high density. Okay, and so, one, because they're not in high density suburbs anyway, the numbers would potentially not work, for a developer. If the numbers work, and in some circumstances, we have been privileged to, do a development, actually 2 developments. I'm doing one recently in a premium school zone as well. I feel that the neighbors are have a resistance against developers. They don't like development. They don't like higher densities. They don't like people, building townhouses or apartments or smaller dwellings, because, it takes away that feel of the suburban feel of the school.
Yeah.
And naturally, they also think, some of the objections that we were getting on this particular site was that, you are, subdividing this into, 3 lots. And so there would be 3 more cars near the school. And this is a high kid area. And these kids, you don't know who these people would be. And these developers are thinking about putting tenants in there. And the tenants might not be school oriented or family oriented.
They'll all be dodgy and they'll all be bikies.
Yeah. The other important consideration is this, right? And this is what I felt in the previous project, that because these school zones are in affluent suburbs, these people would go to nth level to basically, should I say, piss you off, right? And so majority of the times, and a person objects or a neighbor objects, they'll go to the council, do the objection. If you've answered the objections, that's where it ends. In an affluent suburb, they don't want to listen to a no, and so they'll take it to the 𝐸𝐴T, they'll take it to a tribunal, costing you more time, effort, money in making sure that you get the right decision at the tribunal. Yes, you would win because, ultimately it's the res code that takes the precedence. It's not what your personal emotions are. But, it just costed you extra money for no odd reason. It's costed you more time. It's costed you a bit more dissatisfaction, or should I say frustration in the process, because you're developing and these people have costed you just 1 year because they don't want the development happening there.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's an extra consideration to understand, how much of a difference you're making to the area.
Yes.
If potentially you're knocking down a crappy old house and building a nice duplex or something like that, where there is some level of precedence, then possibly your neighbors are probably going to be happier about that. However, if you're building something that's for a higher density and it's right near a school, then, I'm in Sydney, because in residential areas you could build boarding houses, and there was huge uproar around that. Things have changed since
Very similar.
then. So
yes.
Having those sort of considerations when you are developing, keeping in mind the type of neighbors that you're going to have and trying to avoid as many objections as possible is probably going to make your life easier.
Yes.
But this is, I think, a good segue into what are the considerations, or the risks and the disadvantages mainly of investing in the school zone. Are there any disadvantages?
Well, I think we've talked about, the boundary changes, because you don't control it. That could be detrimental to your own investment strategy. So just be careful of, the school catchment zones or the boundary changes, etc. That is predominantly the key. We've talked about, doing the developments and the risk with the neighbors. I think that's another key consideration. The third one, which is an important one, is the reputation of the school. Again, you don't control it. So you might be a hardworking parent and, you want your kids to do well. But because the administration drives the reputation, if the administration changes or the principal changes, the school's reputation can drop quite quickly. And that has happened in the past. I've seen for certain schools where, as soon as the administration change, you see the drop in reputation pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And so those are some of the key risks that you would have to think about from an owner-occupier perspective. If you're thinking about as an investor, the key thing to think about is that you are paying a premium to be in this zone. And so is that premium worth paying for? Is there a longer strategy in play where you want to actually live there in the future? And so that's why you are entering into that pocket as an investor first, and then basically go and live there in say 3, 4, 5 years time, and the kids, starts becoming to school age. And so understanding that, that premium is always attached to these properties is quite the key. Of course, that premium is what gets developers attracted as well, right? You talk about Frankston. Frankston is a typical example. Frankston High Primary gets amazing reviews, whereas Frankston North is a lot of housing commissions, right? And so the areas is not gentrified at all, but that school takes premium. And so anyone who builds in that particular pocket, they get amazing prices or resales of their value because, people want to send their kids to that school.
Yeah. And I went to a school that turned selective. So I missed it when it was selective.
Yeah.
I was the year that was weeded out. Are there considerations for, we talk about the child itself. I mean, there's the property side of things. We're coming in from the angle of it's good for property values potentially and things like that. I think we need to also, as parents, you're a parent, I'm a parent, I'm sure there are lots of parents listening, obviously going to selective school from an academic point of view is fantastic if your child is so inclined. Look at things holistically. If you're moving into an area because of selective school, we want to make sure as well that it's the right choice for your child and their interests, because there's a whole lot of, I guess, there is additional pressure from the school because they want to keep their grades up, right? And that's definitely part of their marketing as well. We got so many people in the 99th percentile of grades.
Yes.
Is your child going to be that way inclined, or are they more inclined towards creative pursuits or more sporting pursuits and all of that? So yes, property and consideration for the property is important.
Yes.
In terms of, are you buying in a good area? At the end of the day, are you making the choice also that's in line with your own child is another it's probably one of the main considerations that you have to make.
Definitely. As an owner-occupier, I think that comes at the forefront before you even talk numbers, right? So the education for the family, the upbringing of the kids, it matters the most. I know of a particular family where 2 kids go to 2 separate schools. And so one kid is a high performer and, he goes to a private school, whereas the other kid doesn't. And, I know that it's a 2-tiered behavior and they are comfortable with that, but, they want to ensure that, the kid is rightly challenged and the other one does not feel that, it needs to be pushed and pushed in the direction that he's not comfortable with. And those are the choices that you have to make.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it's important that we consider both sides of the coin.
Now, one question I do have though is, or maybe a couple of questions is, one is more in relation to the location side of things for school zone. Okay, a lot of people, when they think about school zones, they think that, okay, these are close to city or close proximity to city. Is that the case? Is that what you have usually experienced, Cheryl?
Not really. I mean, having lived in Sydney, the few, the selective schools that I know of have been spread across different places. So not really close to city dependent. They are generally where, like I said, you look at it and you're like, a lot of people want to be in the area, it tends to be closer to some level of transport, I do find.
Yes,
so that
definitely.
it's easier for, the kids to get to school and so on. But no, it's not necessarily city-centric. How about you?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think my experience has been the same. If you look at the data the domain is provided, I feel that, they are spread out between inner, middle, and even outer suburbs of, if I talk Victorian specific or Melbourne specific, they go as far as Berwick, and as close as Pascoe and Malvern and, Hawthorn. And so, yeah, they're well spread around. There is a selective school in Werribee, believe it or not, in Melbourne. And again, Frankston that we have talked about. And so, yeah, suburb does not dictate a selective school. Same with Adelaide. You look at Adelaide, there is a selective school in Anglevale, in Aldinga Beach. They were non-gentrified areas at one given point in time. And as soon as the school was announced, you could see that the fluency has started to go up. And, one of the reasons we were buying in Aldinga was because of that selective school being announced there. And so, yeah, naturally, it does attract a strong owner-occupier sense of, driving those prices up. The other thing, which is quite the key, and this is more from an investment perspective, is while there is a strong sense of buying in a school zone, can you just buy any property in a school zone and it would perform? Could you buy an apartment in a school zone?
That's a really good point. Oh, I'd say no, because just like anything else, you still need to consider, we talked about this in one of our other episodes, right? There are certain considerations that you still have to make about that property. So not every property is going to perform similarly.
100%. I don't disagree. I think it's important that, yes, people would want to rent that apartment, and that rental would always, and so you would have almost zero vacancy rates for that rental. But understand that, people are renting there just to enter into the school. They don't want to live there. Right. So it's not an owner-occupier product. Understand that people are selecting school zones predominantly because they have 2 or 3 kids and they don't want to pay private tuition, private school fees. So usually if a person has 1 kid, they'd be like, well, why would I pay 400,000 or 300,000 of premium to a property? I can just send my kid to a private school and live, at a price point which is much more comfortable to myself. And so these apartments, while they're in the school zone, they provide great rental yield, they would provide great vacancy, they would usually not provide a lot of growth because they are not an owner-occupier product. And naturally, the owner-occupiers what drives the market up because they are emotional buyers. So it's important. Townhouses, maybe, yes, and Mickinnon School Zone is a typical example. It's in Melbourne at least, where there is apartments there. And so it's right in the reach of, should I say, high density area. Not a lot of school zones are in high density area, but Mickinnon School Zone is. And so there are a lot of apartments built right in the Mickinnon School Zone. It caters for both primary and secondary. So it's a premium opportunity, right? But you would see that the apartments haven't done significantly well compared to a townhouse or a house in that same area. And that's predominantly the reason.
And you look at the end there with apartments, you've got to look at the supply and demand, right? If you've got the same sort of product and you've got 200 of the same sort of units in one block, then
definitely
you've got supply issues there. From a rental perspective as well, you're competing with a lot of other properties in that same building or that same facility for the same tenant. So from that aspect, if you had to choose the types of properties, still utilize the same considerations that we've spoken about before. Obviously, the location, size of the land, layout, all those sorts of things to consider whether you're buying the right type of property in that spot.
Definitely, would not agree more. I think this is a good segue to end the podcast. Lovely to talk to you guys. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback in relation to school zones, do jump into the comments below. If you believe that investing in a school zone is actually a bad idea, let's, jump on a podcast and actually talk to us, or maybe drop it into the comments and tell us as to, share your own experience as to what have you invested in a school zone. It hasn't done what it's supposed to do. I know domain data is skewed towards, outstanding price growth, almost 40% year-on-year growth in some cases for school zones. But if you have experienced something completely different, please do, jump into the comments and share your story.
Share your thoughts and experience, and we'll all learn together on this wild property journey that we're on.
Definitely.
Awesome.
Keep smiling, stay safe, keep investing. This is Moss and Cheryl checking out. Adios.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.